Andy,
Going live,
what
baby.
word comes to mind when you think of Earth, you know?
Uh, I don't know. Is that? Oh, you're quoting the beginning of the game.
Yes, I am. Welcome everyone to Oh, wait, well, I guess we didn't technically hit the Audacity. So here's the pre-stream bonus for all you people who watch this. All zero
Yeah,
of
aren't we
you.
supposed to be watching the crab also?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't see the crab.
Oh, you don't see nothing?
Oh wait, maybe I.
Yeah, it
No, there's a little.
should be like the documentary thing they started off with. Yeah.
No, there's a spooky guy. Are you talking about on your Twitch?
Yeah, it should be live, bro.
No, it says offline
I
still.
think you got to refresh, bro.
Okay,
Think
wait.
you
Let's
got
give
to
this a shot.
think you got to
Oh, I
behind
can
the
see it
scenes,
now.
everyone.
I can see it now.
Yeah, it's working. Okay. Well, yeah. All right.
All right. Let's hit the
Yeah,
let's hit the audio then.
count that bad boy down.
3, 2, 1. All right, now we're live on
Yeah.
audio on the pod.
We are live on everything. Welcome everyone back to Cryptic Puzzle. It's been a little bit extra time because busy lives and whatnot. I think we actually managed to beat the next game for the podcast in the same extra stretch, so maybe there'll be less of a gap between this one and the next one. But yeah, welcome everyone back to Cryptic Puzzle. Croptic
My name's
Puzzle.
Andy.
Oh, is that who you are?
Yeah.
Oh,
My name.
okay. Cool.
Great. So thanks for telling everybody that. I'm sure they'll love to know that.
Yeah, I'm not going to share my name anymore. Just kidding.
His
I'm
name
Tommy. And
his name is Duchess the Third.
we don't talk about that part of my life anymore.
It's too late. We
No,
already brought it up.
yeah, well, it's on the internet now too. So anyway, there's a tiny little crab man on the screen, and he's getting loan sharked.
He sure is. And today we're talking, as always, we're talking about video games, and we're going to do deep dives and talk about games we love and talk about mechanics and things. And today we're talking about a wonderful game called Another Crab's Treasure. Tommy,
Andy.
have you played this video game?
No.
It's going to be really hard.
It's going to be a bad podcast episode, probably.
Tommy, is there anything you want to say up top?
About this game?
Yeah.
Ooh. In what way, shape, or form? I don't want to steal
I
your
don't know.
thunder.
I felt like immediately I was like, I feel like Tommy's got something to say right now, and so I turned it over.
You know what? Here's the thing. I love this game. It's really good. It's very, very, very good. It's one of two fantastic games that technically qualify as Souls-likes that are not made by From Software that I would put pretty much up with the other games in a lot of ways. And in addition to it being a Souls-like, it's about environmentalism and anti-capitalism, which really puts it right in my alley. Even if it
like
wasn't a
so
Souls-like.
the cherry on top.
Yeah,
You know.
if it's like someone was like, "What if we made a game for Tommy?" It's a Souls-like. It's kind of SpongeBob-esque in that it's cutesy, but also sarcastic and funny, and also is about the things that I like the most.
Yeah, it's truly an awesome game. I agree with you that it's just a great Souls like that lives up to like a From Software level of game, at least in terms of quality. I learned in playing this game that I realized I am the exclusively Souls like guy and not any actual Souls games guy, and I don't know why, because I didn't mean for that to be intentional, but I feel like that's become my MO.
Yeah, well, we'll probably talk about why that is a bit more later, and probably also on future episodes because uh, in order to date ourselves today, it is June the 3rd, 2024, which means that in just a little over 2 weeks from now, Shadow of the Erd Tree, the Elden Ring expansion, will be dropping, and people might not hear from me for a little while once that comes out. So
Yeah, is it supposed to be like big? Like how big of a? Do you have any idea how much it's gonna be?
So the way that they described it, so you played Elden Ring, so
Yep.
you'll at least be familiar enough with this. The way that it was described was that the DLC will be about the size of Limgrave,
Oh wow.
but more dense.
Isn't Limgrave the biggest area in the game?
Limgrave is probably the most fleshed out area in the entire game, like in terms of like density per landmass, because it's the first area.
Yeah.
And you run around, and there is like no spot that there's. I mean, it's true for a lot of the game, but Limgrave especially. You go around every corner, and there is something there somewhere. Even if it's just kind of inconsequential stuff you find on the overworld map rather than going into something, but blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so now keep in mind, Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of basically like every Souls game with the exception of Dark Souls 2, he said before Elden Ring came out that it would take about 30 hours.
Wait, what?
Yeah. No, he's that for real. He did say that. Yes. And here's the thing. He's technically correct if you knew exactly what you had to do to beat the game and then only did that. You could probably do it on your first try in 30 hours. But the problem is the game that's not how the game works.
It feels like that's a troll. It feels like he did that specifically as a joke to mess with people.
Probably he's the same guy who told everybody that he would pick the pendant in Dark Souls 1 that doesn't do anything as his starting gift. So,
Yeah, sounds like that was a gag specifically.
yeah. So, it's going to be big. It's $40 and nobody's mad about it because they're expecting it to be like, "Oh, this is like every other game I played this year in terms of content like combined." So,
Right.
whatever.
So anyway, all of that is to say is two things: is A, Tommy's going to disappear from the planet real soon, and B, at some point we're going to talk about Elden Ring because really that was sort of the. I feel like in a lot of ways that was the impetus for us starting this show because it's like that's a game in particular where we have really gotten into talking about what makes that game cool and like why I don't like it as much as you like it and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like at some point it has to come up and we have to really talk about it because that's sort of the heart of the show in some ways, you know?
Yeah, that one's going to be, I think, us really leaning into you and I liking specific things about the game differently, and specifically why you and I feel differently about the game because of the ways that we engage with it and the things that we appreciate about games. I think that'll be the one that will probably put our tastes in the most contrast compared to all the stuff that we've talked about so far. I think for the
Yeah.
most part, I think we've agreed pretty wholesale on almost every game we've talked about so far. So it'll be fun to talk about a game that we both appreciate, but for very different reasons. And we'll be like, what? Why do you think this about this thing?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, whether I like Elden Ring or not, which I'm very unsure of, I sure love to talk about it with people who have played it. Like I think it's one of those games that is so it's just cool to talk about. So especially with you because you have such a deep, rich knowledge of all of those games. You know.
Yeah, and I'm a Souls like freak,
Yeah.
admittedly, and I a long time ago bounced off this franchise more than once too. So yeah. Anyway, all right. So we're a little bit into this now. I guess let's loop back around. Yes, we said we were talking about another Crab's Treasure on the screen. If you're watching the stream or the VOD right now, is the little intro to the game, and the pretense of this is that you are Krill, a little hermit crab man, and a loan shark shows up and says, "Hey, I gotta repossess your house," even though he doesn't really have to. He's just a con artist. He's not actually even a loan shark.
Yeah, I love that he's called the loan shark, but he is just one of those toy sharks things with like the little triggers that opens their mouths. Like what a hilarious setup.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And then when you find the guy who actually takes your shell, your home away from you, he's like, "Well, you gotta give me something really good for it back." And the whole quest is for you to try and get that thing back for him, a fancy treasure on a map that happens to be on the back of a cereal box. It's all very cutesy, very very like I said before, very SpongeBob-esque in a bunch of ways. With the like, oh yeah, that's just a human thing that's there, and people are like, wow, what's this? I don't understand.
Yeah, I feel like this game sort of surprised everybody because when you start, you're like, oh, cool. This is just their flimsy excuse for you to go hit things with a fork and play a Souls like that your hermit shell got taken. But like, I feel like pretty quickly the game sort of reveals its hand, which is that it has a pretty great story going on in general, and I think everybody was surprised by that.
Yeah, it's got a lot to say about a whole bunch of stuff, and it's right up my alley because it's how I feel about a lot of things. Yeah, Krill goes on a pretty personal journey because he initially was like, "Yeah, I just want to be in my shell. I don't want anyone to bother me. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want the birds to eat me. That's all I care about. I just want to stay in my house on the beach, and I don't have my house anymore, so I got to go get my house." Because that's the only
Yeah.
thing that matters to me. And throughout the course of the game, he realizes that he's like making friends with people and that he doesn't really actually know what he's going to do after he gets his shell back. And then a whole bunch of other stuff happens that honestly, I don't really want to totally spoil like the all the conversations and everything about it because one, I think if you're listening to this, that you should just play this. You could play it
Yeah.
while listening to us right now. I would recommend that because this game came out at full price, $30, because it's just a relatively small indie studio called Aggro Crab, which is a great studio name, and it's extremely worth $30. So you should just go purchase it, even if you're not going to play it for a little bit. Just give them your money; they deserve it. Anyway, yeah, so Krill, he really wants his shell back, and he's gonna fight crazy animals in the wild. He's gonna fight evil capitalist people in the sea. The currency is microplastics, which, as a millennial, man, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, well, you know.
Yeah. It hits hard immediately when they're like, "Oh yeah, there's microplastics everywhere." You're like,
Yeah, I'm
"Oh,
like, ha
this
ha
game.
ha
Oh."
ha.
Yeah, you're like this game. Oh, this game has taken a turn that I was not expecting for the whimsical, colorful tone that was presented to me. It's yeah, it hits pretty hard.
Yeah, there was a very funny a promo video, I think, on April Fool's Day, right before this game actually launched. Or maybe it was around when it launched. I can't remember what the actual release date was. Where they said that they were just going to add basically a Dark Souls mode to the game. So there was just a little like short form content trailer they released with just like, yeah, and here's everything, and it's like all gray and drab and foggy. And you know, there's a point in the game when you're dragging your fork behind you because you're depressed and stuff, and it had him doing that as the default walk animation. They called it depression mode. And then they just said, F it, Anor Londo, and then it's just Krill walking around Anor Londo from Dark Souls. so,
Hilarious.
yeah. Anyway, these people, they like their Dark Souls, and it shows a lot in the game design. So I guess we can start to talk a little bit about how the mechanics work. So do you want? I've been talking a bunch, so you take it away, Andy.
Yeah. Well, actually, before we get into the mechanics, I want to say, like, in terms of this game being related to Dark Souls, like, one of the things about Dark Souls, Elden Ring, all of those games is, like, typically you start the journey with the world being rotted away in this, like, post apocalypse nightmare pretty exclusively in some form or another. And I love that this game's version of that. Well, first of all, you wake up when it hasn't happened yet, and in the first couple of hours, the microplastics start to infect everybody's brains, and like that is basically how this world becomes like the Dark Souls version of this world. And I thought that was such a cool, interesting twist on what is that typical idea. And I love that you get to see it play out in the first like hour or so, you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a game where you're playing as a little crab guy talking to other sea creatures isn't like rooted in reality. Basically, there's also an entire magic system called umami that exists in this world, which is great, and also a wonderful name. But all that said, I think you're correct in that it has kind of the most almost the most grounded post-apocalypse because the idea of the world decaying in all the other Souls games is very, very extremely supernatural, whereas this one
Mhm.
is, hey, there's garbage all over the bottom of the ocean. I wonder if that could happen. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just a great premise that like all the sea creatures are going crazy because they've been infected by microplastics. It's just such a genius little setup, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't quite work because microplastics is also like the currency and everything, but I love the idea that the level up system is that you are purging the microplastics from Krill's body, which makes him
Yeah, right.
stronger, which is very funny.
Yeah, right.
But it doesn't quite work, but like the little joke just as a moment I think is perfectly fine.
Well, I think it kind of does work. I think it's sort of intentionally capitalist. It's like the fact that they're so obsessed with this like fake currency that doesn't mean anything, but at the same time it's poisoning them and destroying them. I feel like is maybe a little intentional. Like I feel like the game pokes fun a lot at the fact that everyone is obsessed with microplastics despite it making them go insane, you know?
Yep. The main thing is, why can't I remember the character's name? Which is very funny because Krill also can't remember his name for most of the game. The blue guy, the blue crab. The blue
Oh,
crab who is the parody of the tech bro who just really loves Elon Musk and thinks he's a
oh,
genius and that he's doing incredible things for the world and he's such a benefit for everyone. And he
he's
goes
so
the
good.
entire game about the local horrifying factory owner capitalist man treating him like this. He's like, well, he would never do anything wrong. Like there's no way I got to talk to him about why this factory's so gross and everyone here's like dying and stuff. There's no way that it would be like this if he knew about it. Yeah, he's just
So
doing
yeah.
that the entire game. Like, no, this is by design. This is in fact exactly what all of these people want. So yeah, they lean into the manufacture of like the plastics and the sludge and stuff, and can't remember what the goop is actually called that starts to make people go crazy, but it's kind of like the equivalent of almost hollowing in Dark Souls. But
Is there a name for the goop? I thought it was just like
there is,
they
and
just
I'm struggling to remember what it is.
huh.
Yeah, they name the status effect after it too. I can't remember. Anyway, but yeah.
Oh.
Um yeah,
So this
that's
game is Dark Soul but crab.
this game
Is Dark Soul but crab.
is
I can't believe it took me so long to say that. I've been saying it like 3 times a day for like weeks.
you were saying it like 3 times a minute earlier.
It's like Dark Soul but crab.
Right. Yeah. Let's add the count. Tally number 2
So so
and
this game I mean like okay, obviously you look at it and it's like Dark Souls. But I think it's taking a lot of inspiration from that style of game. It's obviously a Souls-like, with very intentional, weighty combat in a 3D space, where mostly you face off one-on-one against enemies with patterns that are that do a lot of damage to you but are easy to learn. I'm like describing what a Souls-like is, I guess now, so that's fun. Um, yeah, I guess it might be more useful to describe like the tweaks that make this game different than Dark Souls than to like describe it and break it down. You know what I mean?
yeah, I suppose. So I mean, so if anyone is currently watching the video version of the VOD right now, you can see that Krill is running around. He's got a fork as a weapon. There's only one weapon in this game, and he can also put on a number of different shells that exist around the environment, and that's usually just like all the other stuff we're talking about. Usually some kind of human trash or something that does normally exist in the ocean. And he puts on the shell, and that has its own kind of defensive capabilities and stuff. Is what has its own way of blocking and its own life bar. So it has a durability that does matter. And you can use it to parry stuff. And also, it allows for the shell is basically like the entire equipment system, I guess I would say,
Mm-hmm.
because it also enables the use of the stowaways. And the stowaways are basically like rings or talismans or whatever in a Souls game that have these passive effects while you have them equipped. When you have a shell equipped in another crab's treasure, you get the use of those stowaways because it's theoretically like they're tucked inside your shell with you, helping you out, basically. But if you don't have your shell, all of your stowaways are inactive as well. And also, if you don't have your shell, you don't have any means of defense other than dodging. So you pretty much always want to have a shell. It's not that hard to keep a shell on you all the time. They're everywhere, all over the place. So
Yeah, and you get abilities that make it easier to get shells and maintain your shell and stuff too, which is cool. But
yeah,
yeah,
and
it's like that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, I was just gonna say. Additionally, all the shells have an ability. So kind of like your weapon arts or your Ashes of War in Souls. Every shell is kind of the equivalent because there's not swapping weapons. Your shell allows you to use a specific unique thing. Maybe not unique. There's usually a move set or a class of them, and there's small, medium, and large ones, kind of like small, medium, and large weight classes. In Souls games, changes how your roll works. Blah blah blah. It's a very pared down, extremely simplified version of a bunch of those mechanics. Some of which are how they handled it with Sekiro. Like Sekiro only has one weapon. I don't believe there's a stamina system. There's the grappling hook. There's the ability to jump. Blah blah blah. A lot of the movement and ways that you get around are much closer to Sekiro than a Souls game. Souls games, you don't really have a whole lot of movement options. You can run and roll. Elden Ring
Yeah.
added the jump, which was a huge deal. But that's the only one of those with it. So movements is extremely important in those games, but your movement options are kind of limited. So you got to get real good with the dodge for the most part.
Yeah, so really, like this game, the other thing that makes it stand out is it is sort of like a 3D platformer, somewhat open world game where like your movement and your traversal is part of your exploration, which like for me is kind of what sold the game because I mean, it's like I love games with like great combat, but like when there's an element of like movement and exploration that is different than just running on the ground and rolling, like I don't know, that really brings the game alive to me. You also get like a grappling hook which allows you to like grapple around and you kind of like float in the air because you're I guess not in the air, but in the water you have like a little hover that happens. So like it like kind of diegetically, like I feel like what's cool is all of these things make sense logically. Like of course you would be using everything as a shell, and of course they would have different properties, and of course you would hover through the air as a little crab and like be able to jump and kind of swim. It all makes sense in its own self-contained world, even though it's borrowing ideas from other games, you know?
Yeah, and it does a really good job of making sure that like it understands what its themes are and how to make its mechanics fit its themes
Hmm.
in ways that are convincing, which I think is good. Um, let's see what's
Yeah.
happening on the screen right now. Duchess Magista. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about this lady entirely. This is so early in the game that I didn't remember that this happened.
Oh, she cracked me up.
Yeah.
She cracked me up. I loved her.
Yeah, she's a she's
Um,
a crazy queen lady who talks down to you like you're nothing because capitalists.
because queens aren't really capitalists if we want to be technical, but
Well, they are the ruling class, and it is the difference is the haves and the have-nots. It's a class war, Andy. So you can call it
yeah,
different, but it's really not. Anyway, moving on.
it really all goes back to feudalism. So no, um, yeah. So like, really, at the end of the day, it takes the core of like what a 3D action Souls-like game would be, and makes it really simple and beginner friendly, and also adds like an element of exploration, movement, and like maybe some light puzzle solving. I feel like later in the game, but not quite as much as I kind of thought there would be. Um, but it's all just like so extremely simple. Like you said, there aren't different weapon types. There are only a few move sets for you to wrap your head around, which is why I feel like this game is awesome.
That's it. It's the only reason.
It's awesome. That's
There's
it.
not there's not too much for Andy's brain. That means good.
It's yeah. I mean, look, man. I don't know. This is my personal favorite. This is my favorite Souls like of all time. Like including that against something like Elden Ring. Um, and I think that's because the game is really simple, because the presentation is really lovely, and because I feel like all of the tweaks that make this game more friendly to players is like exactly it kind of fixes like all the problems I typically have with Souls like games. I think one of the biggest being like I love the leveling system. Like the leveling system feels so substantial. Like I was always first of all, it's pretty easy to get enough microplastics to level up at all times. Like you never feel like you're grinding. You always just kind of feel like when you get through a section, you have another couple levels that you can pump out. Um but I don't know, I always felt stronger. Like I would increase my health and my attack and I would go out and I would immediately feel that there was a difference and it was easier to fight enemies. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to get too into I think how the specifics of like the leveling and everything system plays out until we start to talk closer to end game personally, because I think it actually starts to fall apart a little bit there. But we will get there when we get there, because in the beginning I agree with you. It is for something that I don't really know that it bills itself as this, but it has certainly been billed as the easy Souls game, Souls like, compared to other games. Um, and that's true. I think for a bunch of reasons, and we can talk about that later on. But I think in the beginning, it does do a very good job of showing you that there are a number of different, like, hey, you can upgrade this, or you can get this, or you can do this. And as you said, when you actually get those buffs, they feel substantial. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, that's worth doing, right? And
Yeah,
be
and the simplicity of it too, like again, just makes it's really easy to just know like I'm going to increase my health and I am going to be stronger instead of worrying about trying to like create a build or something like that. You know what I mean?
right, yeah. There's no real build. There's basically, hey, there's probably a size of shell you like using because you maybe you don't want to use, if you're like me, you don't want to use a large shell because you don't like what it does to your dodge roll. Um, and you'll use probably small for pretty much the entire game because it gives you the fastest one. But not everybody cares about that. Some people are just going to block the whole time, and they care about a
Yeah.
shell with a ton of defense and durability because you can do that. So that's the closest thing to a build, quote unquote. It's really more of a, you have, and I think this is the biggest benefit to Another Crab's Treasure, and I think what it does uniquely very well is you have so much at your disposal. You have
Yeah.
so many options, despite the fact that there's not a ton of weapons or something to choose from. There's not a bazillion spells like an Elden Ring or something like that. You don't get a ton of specific options, but you do get a bunch that have a very, very, very specific purpose. And in a game like this, when you have all of those things at your disposal all the time, it makes your tool set like incredible. You have something to deal with every situation all the time. And that gets more and more and more obvious as the game goes on. And I think it's pretty cool because I like the way that doing nearly every single thing in this game feels. There's very little that I think is kind of lacking. The combat is not super complicated, as you were saying before, Andy. It's very, there's a guy, he's probably bigger than you. He's going to wind up an attack. You're going to find how you're going to either avoid or block that attack. And then when he's done doing that, you're going to hit him. And you're going to do that over and over again until he dies.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like what's cool too is I feel like they really ease you into the options. Like they kind of show you pretty early like you meet the moon snail, which it seems like we're about to somewhat shortly. And you learn about the umami powers, and they kind of dip your toe into a few different shell types and stuff. But like by the end, when you've unlocked all of the upgrades, like you kind of slowly add these things onto your arsenal. So you always are feeling like a little bit more capable. Similar to like a game where you might just traditionally level up. Like I don't know, I feel like you're constantly getting new things that you can add, which is so cool. Like you just feel like you're getting better all of the time.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different because I think like relatively early on we're not seeing it on screen just yet, but there's a field boss that will run around and actually hunt you down. And the first time you actually see that guy, when it comes to like pure numbers, you don't even want to look at him because he's
Yeah.
probably just going to show up and smack you, and you're just going to fly halfway across the sands between and explode. Um,
Yeah.
and you're mostly going to run because chipping away at him isn't going to do a ton of damage unless you're patient. All right. I mean, that's fine and good. Or you could be a psycho like me, and on like the second opportunity you ran through the sands between, you're like, I'm gonna fight him. I'm gonna
Yeah,
I'm gonna fight the big crab man right now because I know I'm gonna have to eventually. And also, I would love to run around this open world area without him stalking me, because that's the whole pretense of him being there. Is there's very particular safe zone roads you can run around where he won't attack you. But if you want to do any exploring, he's gonna attack you.
I don't think that's true. I think he's like tucked in a corner.
No, no, that's the whole. All right. The only you know how I'm gonna prove this is because I booted up the game a little bit before this and went right through that area. And even though he was gone, the NPC still talked about the smell stations thing or whatever the pretense was that they used. There's even characters in game who talk about it.
I am very baffled by that because I will tell you that I would say the first 4 hours of this game, I like didn't even enter the castle. Like I did everything that there was to do in the sands between besides fight that guy, and he never bothered me. Like I went
Weird.
around, I beat the blue, yeah, I beat the blue shell boss guy. And then like I hunted down all the other strong crabs that have like the purple eyes and give you umami. Like
Mm.
I got to probably like level 5 or 6 or something. I was pretty strong. And I killed like every other thing, and I like literally before I even got to the castle just had the best time doing everything in the sands between, and he just stayed in that corner. Like he never left. He just hung out over there.
Interesting. Genuinely don't know if that's a bug or not because
I
my
wonder
because
if it's because I didn't aggro him. Because, like, I saw him from a pretty far distance, and I was like, nah, I think I already kind of know that that's something I should fight way later. And I never engaged with him until I was ready to fight him.
yeah, he showed up and I was like, oh, the tree sentinel from Elden Ring.
Right. Right.
You walk out of the tutorial area and they go, look at this giant guy on a horse.
Yeah, right. So maybe it's because I never aggroed him that he never hunted me. But yeah, like I didn't, he didn't bother
I'm
me.
wondering because I remember basically as soon as I strayed off the path, the health bar would appear on the top of the screen and the music would change and he'd start coming after me. So after I just was like, all right, well I know where the first objective is, so I just went and I did that and then I walked back. I was like, all right, I'm gonna fight him now because I want to. But anyway,
Hmm.
yeah, Pagurus, Pagurus,
Are
Pagurus.
we not are we not talking about the other guy where he does that later when you have to cross to like a new area?
Ooh, I don't. Which guy?
Like when you go out into the open ocean and it's like a huge, huge crab.
Oh,
Are
yeah,
you
no,
thinking of
that
him?
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Uh
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I
no,
thought
no.
you were talking.
Yeah, the first guy with the bike lock that they use like the guillotine, which is really
Yes,
funny.
that's who I thought you were talking about.
Yeah, no, I
Okay,
that
got
was
it.
actually the very first thing I did when I did this. I went and I fought him immediately. I'm like, I'm gonna learn the combat system right now. That was how I did it.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so we are on the
Yeah,
same
we're on the
page
same
then.
page.
Yeah, I did also fight Pagurus like pretty early, which made me feel so cool. Like I beat him well before you were supposed to.
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, I know what the mechanics are now. Come at me, big boy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um yeah, man. I feel like the other thing that's interesting about the shell too is that like so the parry that is built into your shell, which is like pretty integral to the game, like the parry itself is the whole game is built around it. But what's interesting is so you block and you go into your shell, and to parry you have to release your shell at the correct time. And I feel like that is such a safer way for players to engage with a parry mechanic because as opposed to like
Explicitly
going in
safer.
and being
Yes,
huh?
explicitly safer.
Right, like you are safe until you parry, as opposed to going in vulnerable and being like, "Let me press the button at the right time." It's just a I don't know. It's a smart way to make you engage with it, but feel like safe enough to engage with the parry because chances are you're blocking anyway. You might as well learn when you should let go of it.
Yeah, you know what? Let's really get into not just another Crab's Treasure mechanics. Let's just talk video game mechanics in general and what you and
Yeah.
I mean by safe right now. So I'm gonna put this it's going to be maybe strange because I know you and I don't typically talk about it this way. Let's put it in fighting game terms. You know,
Okay.
so what's happening is every ability and every attack that everybody has and everything, especially in fighting games, has startup frames, active frames, and then recovery frames, right? So when we're
Yep.
talking frames, we mean as though they are frames of animation. It is not explicitly locked to how that works, but just for simplicity's sake, let's just put them in frames of animation if we're running at a consistent frame rate in a game. So startup frames mean I hit the button and it's going to take X number of frames for that attack to become active, which means nothing is happening until those startup frames are done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Active frames mean if I'm swinging my sword through a guy, if the sword touches somebody because it's active, it's going to do damage to them if it hits their hurt box, right? Great. Cool. That's how things collide. And then recovery frames is all the time after you did the attack that you can't do anything else until those recovery frames are over, right?
Yep.
So, and all of these things also apply to like blocking and everything, right? So sometimes like blocking in a lot of things tends to be a one frame action, so you can do it quickly, but it still requires some kind of reaction. And parries typically require a really tight timing, which means if I go and I hit a button to block and I hit it too late, I'm getting hit in the face, right?
Yep.
The thing that they do with this system, so as you said, the way that the parry system works in this game, instead of it being a timing on a block, it is I am holding the block button already, and if I release the block button at the right time, then I get my parry off. But because I am blocking, I am inherently in a safe position to begin with, whereas before you would not be in the other circumstance.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yes.
So I agree, and I think it's a great for something that is purported to be the easier quote unquote version of something like that. Even though I don't think that the parry method is inherently easier than doing a parry in a Souls game. It is objectively safer because doing something too early or too late typically results in a punish. This one results in you doing it too early. Because if you do it too late, you just block. No big deal.
Wait, don't you mean the opposite? Like if you do it too early, you'll be blocking?
If you do it
Oh,
too,
you mean like let
yeah,
go,
yeah.
letting
If you,
go.
if you do
I
it too
see.
early, I have now pulled the shell off, and I'm gonna get punched in the face.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like it's also just encourages you to parry because like you're like no matter who you are, you're gonna have to block in this game. Like these attacks have a lot of hit boxes, and there's gonna be a lot of blocking. So like you kind of have a moment where you're like, oh well, I'm blocking anyway, and I have to release my block. I like learning when I should do that is like you're already kind of like 75% of the way there in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and it
Yeah.
it makes it a tantalizing tactic to use, right? Because it is good and powerful, and parries. If I remember right, parries also increase the enemy's stagger meter. So again, much
Mm-hmm.
like yeah. So remember when you said it's like Souls but crab? It's actually Sekiro but crab because. It's got the exact same posture system as Sekiro does.
Yeah, I love the posture. I love breaking the enemy's posture not only in this game but just in any game. Like I love it's like oh, I don't know. It's so good because like you feel double rewarded for learning the patterns because well, it's like I don't know. It's I feel like it's a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more generous because instead of just learning the attacks and not dying, like if you can learn the attacks for a smaller number or a lesser amount of time than killing the boss, you get a huge reward by getting a ton of damage off. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Yeah. So I love stagger crush mechanics, whatever it is you want to call it in video games. It's really, really good. They've existed in RPGs and stuff for a long time now too.
Yeah.
Like actually, it's a hybrid between RPG and action game that had a very prominent stagger mechanic. Final Fantasy 16. I liked that part about the combat the most because getting an enemy into stagger was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful feeling. Literally every single time it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't just for a burst of damage. It's they sit there and they take a knee and you just get to wail on the boss for a little while he takes extra damage, which is nice. In this
Yep.
case, I can't remember what the actual stagger system is called because every game calls it something cute and different. I do know that when you actually knock somebody down, they call it them being capsized, which is maybe
Yes.
my favorite name for any of the you actually for real staggered the guy
Yeah.
moment.
Yep.
It's wonderful. And then you can eventually unlock with Mr. Moonsnail, who we are seeing on screen right now. You can unlock a bunch of abilities, which includes something basically like the riposte system in a Souls game, where you walk up to the staggered person and then you do a crazy huge attack that does a bunch of damage.
Yeah, which I unlocked that way too late. I'm gonna say I wish I had unlocked that way earlier because it made a ton of stuff way easier. I was like super late game when I finally got that ability. I was like, oh man, what am I doing?
You know, I'm curious how you even got to the late game without unlocking it because the amount of umami crystals this game gives you is like there is I have a feeling, I don't know what the actual numbers are on this. I have a feeling there is more than twice the amount you actually need to max out everything in the game with them.
I don't know if it's quite that much, but they're very generous for
I
sure.
so if I remember right, the main screen tells you there's like 1400 or something like that in the game. I have spent every umami crystal you can, and I was playing the game earlier, found more while I was running around trying to find the last adaptation that I didn't have, and I had 540 something of them still.
Yeah, I think
So
the
you
reason
are you
I
are
think
awash with them.
Yeah, I think the reason I didn't unlock it so late is not because of the umami, but I think there was a point when I just literally forgot to teleport back and do the upgrades, and I unlocked like 9 things all at once. It was just like boom, 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 and I was like, wow, I unlocked all these things
Oh yeah, for
like
me it
way
was
late
like
in the
my
game.
explicit initial mission was the thing that was most important to me in the entire game was I'm going to max out this skill tree as soon as I
Yeah.
can. So,
I will say one of my favorite and simultaneously least favorite abilities in the skill tree is the hammer, the charged up hammer thing.
oh, you mean
You know
the
what I'm talking
actual
about?
best ability in the game?
Okay.
My favorite one.
I okay, I think it feels okay. So what we're talking about, by the way, is there's an ability you can unlock later where you can use a charge attack to smash your fork into a shell, which will turn it'll effectively turn your fork into a giant hammer, which like has a different feel than the fork, and it also like breaks enemies a little bit. It probably staggers them more.
It does, yeah.
Um, which is so cool. I think it feels so cool. Like when I was doing the hammer, I was like, man, this feels awesome. But I don't know. I kind of I hit a point where I was like, but I can do 3 fork swipes in a lesser amount of time, and it'll do more damage. But my biggest problem is that I couldn't turn it off, and I kept accidentally trying to do charge attacks with my regular fork on enemies and picking up uh, a shell instead.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that I ever actually had that problem because basically the moment that I bought the hammer thing, I was like, okay, so this is how I swing the weapon now. I
I'm
I
surprised
I
because it's
almost
so
never use
slow.
the regular fork ever after that
It's
point.
so It's so slow, and I think if you were to mathematically time out how many hits you could get in during the time of one big slow hammer attack, I think it's more with the regular fork than it is with the hammer. And I could be wrong, but like that's when I stopped doing it because I was like, oh, I'm actually doing more damage with the regular fork just in the way I'm playing.
I think mathematically you are correct that like the raw DPS is probably higher. But much
Hmm.
like the way that I play all the other Souls games, I'm not a boring person who takes the straight sword and just mashes R1 the whole game because that's a really unfun way to play the combat. And that's why I didn't do that in this game because the most fun way to swing any kind of melee weapon in any game is for it to take like a full second for them to pick it up and then just clobber the enemy with it, and then they fall over and they just die. I'm a big fan of big heavy weapons in general. So the hammer, the moment that showed up, or the moment I saw it in the skill tree, I was like, oh, got it. That's my other
Yeah.
weapon, technically.
It's cool. I just wish it was like stronger because I felt like the risk reward was a little bit unbalanced. Like I just felt like the risk of getting hit during the long windup wasn't worth it because I was like getting my butt kicked with it. But
That's that.
it's just
Hey, hey, Andy. You know how you can avoid that?
by not sucking. Yeah, yeah, got it.
Get good.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a cool idea, and I like that it diegetically makes sense. I just was like a little bummed when I was like, ah man, it's not as
You
fun as
know,
using the
my
fork
favorite part
for
about
me.
you saying that it diegetically makes sense is that it really does. Like they thought about it because whenever there's something a shell that's like really brittle, like a shot glass or the disco ball or something like that, if you so you can also hit down to pull the shell off of your back to turn into the hammer.
Hmm.
If you either do that or do the stab on one on the ground, it just breaks because
Oh,
thrusting a
really?
fork really hard at it would shatter something like that. So it just breaks. Yeah, it's very funny. It's
Wow.
one of those little details where I was like, oh, cool. They did think about that because no, it wouldn't really make sense for me to stab a shot glass and then use it as a hammer.
Yeah.
That doesn't really
Wow,
work.
that is clever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I say with the umami powers in the game, I'm like, yeah, you can't stab a shot glass. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, so all of that is to say, like, while at the core, this game is like it essentially is a Souls like or a Sekiro or a, an action RPG with really punishing and deliberate combat. We could call that the new name. It rolls off the tongue better. While it is one of those, it goes to great lengths to really have its own identity, which I think like really struck me and obviously struck you just talking about it because like again, like the whole idea of a Souls like I know that name frustrates you, the genre name. The name itself does not frustrate me, but I feel like the spirit of it does when you play a game that is like, oh, it's another dark, gritty fantasy medieval world with a post-apocalypse, and the mechanics are just so similar to Dark Souls that you're like, I may as well be playing Dark Souls, whereas this game is not at all that way. It is taking ideas and making something wholly original.
What I think is interesting in the way that you describe the issues with the term Souls like is that you were like, I don't really care about it because of the name, but I do care about it for all the parts that actually matter.
Well, yeah, I care about
The way that it makes us talk. Like, okay, so the thing, yes, all right, we're gonna go on a brief Souls like name tangent for a second. Genre naming in general is supposed to, when you say something, make you go, I know roughly how that thing works or what it's like, and to have some idea of whether or not I'm going to like it, right? When somebody says, hey, do you want to go see blank movie? I go, what kind of movie is it? If they tell me it's going to be a horror movie, I'm probably going to say no, because I think most horror movies, with some very key exceptions, are garbage, and I don't want to watch that. So when somebody says Souls like, and what they really mean is that there's a corpse run system in the game, and that like maybe it's like not easy. It's not actually describing anything specific about the game. It's talking about one or two mechanics. And I think that's what Souls like turned into. It's the same thing with Metroidvania. It's like, is there a map and is it a 2D platformer and you can go places? That's a Metroidvania now. Now that one's a little bit more fleshed out because people understand that and it's a bit simpler. But it's just it's an unfortunate use of a term that could be fine if it didn't inherently confuse people. Anyway,
well, I think I agree. I think we weirdly agree completely, but for some reason I guess you seem to think the name is to blame. Where like I don't think the name is to blame. I think and maybe that's because like
the name isn't to blame. The laziness of people being unable to accurately describe something and then choosing a name like Souls like, that's the problem. It's not just the name Souls like. The name Souls like is a symptom of the bad way that we talk about this thing, the same way that Metroidvania was 25 years ago. That's all.
oh, so you're frustrated with the thing. You're not frustrated with the name.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well then
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
in that
I
case,
was like, Andy, what we're doing right now is we're agreeing at each other.
yeah, we agree totally. I don't know, like I guess
Completely
when you
agree.
said you were frustrated at the name, you were cuz and maybe that's like for me like people describe games like Hyper Light Drifter or Hollow Knight as a Souls like, and I'm like, those are feel like completely different games, but like
Hyper Light
you
Drifter, I
are
can kind of see, a little bit, but still, even then, like, it's definitely
well,
closer than Hollow Knight. That's for sure. Hollow Knight
well,
is, you know,
well, sure, but if you're talking about taking those game ideas and like breaking them out of this specific box, I'm like, I think it's fair to say like they are Souls like, you know, even though they're not 3D action combat focused. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe that's why I'm less frustrated with the name itself, because
well,
I'm like a little bit okay with people more liberally saying um those things. You know what I mean?
oh yeah, but I think again my frustration is it's the human mentality part of it, because if we go back even further in time before the Metroidvanias, we call you if I say first person shooter, you know exactly what that is. Like honestly, you know that probably even though it's not your kind of game, you know roughly what that looks like and generally what the idea of a first person shooter is, probably more than almost any other genre like in the entire world of video games,
Right, but they
right?
used to call them Doom likes.
They
Is that
used
where
to
you're
call them
going with
Doom
this?
clones because
Yeah.
Doom was the only game that did that, and they were still figuring out what all the tropes of it were. But eventually, they called it something different that was actually indicative of what it was. We never
Well,
figured that out with Metroidvanias, and we're never going to figure it out with Souls likes. That's my
well,
frustration.
I like the term Metroidvania. I don't think it's
Oh,
problematic,
I
but
hate it. It's just as bad as Souls likes.
I think it's I don't I think it's not as bad as Souls likes, but I think
It's closer to the reality of the type of game. Like it is people are less confused about what the term Metroidvania means, but I still think it's something that gets used as a catch-all for so many. Like, oh, I made a pixel man and there's a map and I'm gonna get an ability or two.
yeah, well, I think maybe the problem at the core of it is that it for as long as we've had Dark Souls, we just haven't had as many games like you were saying about Doom, right? Like there was a point when people figured out the tropes and games started to really expand and be very different than Doom, and it feels like just in terms of game design, we are not past those stages yet, and I feel like this game is maybe indicative that designers are starting to get there, right? Because you're right, like is the corpse run mechanic, it doesn't have to be in a Souls game. Like you can remove that mechanic and still have something that
Also, corpse
could
runs
maybe
are
be
not a Souls invention. They're
right,
just a very
exactly.
substantial portion of the way that that game ends up playing out,
Right,
and that's why
right.
people think about it that way. So
Right. So people take those very specific things like the corpse runs and the fog walls and the flasks, and they go like, well, that specific thing is why it's a Souls-like game. But you know, eventually we will hopefully break past that and make games that are inspired but not so close.
yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
think my main issue with it is think about the time scale. Andy, how long ago did Demon Souls come out?
God, if I know, 2001 or something.
No, 2009. It's been 50, oh, and it's been 15 years. Okay. It's been
Yeah.
15 years for us to figure out a different name for what to call these things, and we haven't, which means it's not going to happen.
But there also haven't been, well, I guess I shouldn't
15
say there
years is
haven't.
enough for like 3 console generations back in the day. It ain't happening. It's over.
Yeah, but for some games, that's like the development time of like 3 games. Like, you know, like,
That's only a
and
modern problem, and this is a whole. Here's the thing. I would also love to talk about this, but that's got to be a different episode.
well, I guess what I'm saying is that feels like a long time, but like that from 1990 to 2005 is very different from 2009 to 2024, especially when you're talking about games that like typically are expensive and hard to develop, I guess is the core of what I'm saying. But you have a point, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, I think that when it comes to expensive and hard to develop, you know why games get like really long budgets and take like a bazillion years. Someone had to decide to make it that complicated. Like I'm not,
Scope creep.
yeah, like don't get me wrong. I'm not saying video games are easy. I think video games are maybe the hardest art form to make because it encapsulates like every single other art form into it, and then has to work cohesively in and also engage a person interacting with it, which is insane to me on a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
levels. All that said, a game doesn't need to take 7 years and be 80 hours long and look pretty and everything. You can come up with a mechanically sound game on a budget and
Yeah.
have it be really good. It's weird. It's almost like the episode we're talking about a game that does exactly that. It's
That's true, but how
weird.
long did this game take? It probably took 5 years.
Let's find out. I'm going to Google this real quick.
Yeah, Google it. So, but yes, dude, you're like talking to the person who agrees more than anybody because I almost exclusively play indie games. Like, super, super hard agree. Like, this game is like the encapsulation of why people should be buying indie games and why indie games are awesome and like, hopefully like the turn that this is hopefully the turn that game development will make. And of course it's not, but like if it was, we would have a lot better games for a lot cheaper, you know?
There is a funny copy pasta that is like an old 90s Sonic thing from, I think, the cartoons, and it just replaces all of his text with, I want shorter games with worse graphics that take longer to come out, and I'm not kidding.
Yes, yes, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking
Which
about.
is extremely true. Anyway, speaking of anti-capitalism, another crab's treasure. Let's get back to the video game, I think, and the loan shark, who's not really a loan shark on the screen right now. He's just talking
Yeah,
about
wait,
pawning off his home.
wait. Did you figure out how long it took to develop this game?
No, it's not readily available. They announced
Oh.
it in 2022. Um, I think it had some kind of minor early access thing. Maybe it was only with particular like content creators and stuff, but
Hmm.
I wouldn't say it seems like a pandemic game. I'll put it that way. So yeah, let's call it maybe at most like three. So it came out April 25th. So let's call it like 3.5, 3-ish years, 3 to 4 years probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? It may be less time, maybe more time. Not sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so another crab's treasure. Uh, I don't remember where the last thing was that we were talking about in this game specifically.
No, me neither. We're very good at this.
um, do we
Professionals.
want to? I mean, yeah. I mean, I feel like we've gone pretty well through like the combat, why it's simple, why it's great. Again, I'll just say like I feel like the difficulty of where I want this game is exactly where I personally want difficulty to be. Oh, we didn't talk about the accessibility difficulty settings, which I feel like are super awesome.
You know what? Let's just talk about the whole difficulty and balance discussion, because I actually really want to get into this because I have a ton of opinions on
Yeah.
it with this
Yeah,
game
let's do it.
specifically, actually. So I want
All right.
you to say about why you think it rides a perfect line for you, and then I'm going to talk about all the extremely specific problems I had with it as somebody who's very experienced with Souls games. Not that it's bad or inherently bad, but just that for the experience that I was personally looking for, I would have done it differently. That's all.
Yeah, I just like I think it walked that perfect line of difficult but also easy to read and easy to understand, um, and not super duper unforgiving. Like those three things. I mean, it was hard, but at least the beginning felt harder. I feel like the end, most of the bosses went down pretty easy for me, which is still fine with me though, because like I think I want the combat to feel good more than I want it to be hard. But even the hard bosses, which there were some tough bosses. In particular, there's like a shrimp guy who is like a ninja man. Um, you know who I'm talking about?
Are you talking about Inkerton or are you talking about the samurai crab?
No, the samurai crab.
Yeah.
And he like comes out of like the leaves
Yeah, and
or the
he pulls his chopsticks katanas out of the chopstick holder sheath. It's really very funny. I love it.
yeah. He was my favorite boss, and I think that's because he probably took me like 5 or 6 tries, but by the end, every single attack that he did, I knew precisely how to respond. I knew precisely how to react. He has a combination of ones that you have to dodge, obviously. Um, he has a combination of ones that you have to parry, or at least you should parry, and like he was difficult, but he was readable. And even in the fight where I beat him, I probably made 3 mistakes without failing. The other thing I love is that enemies in the world can still mess you up, but they're pretty generous with giving you heart kelp pods. So I never felt like when you've got that feeling of like, oh man, I only got one heart kelp pod, like, am I going to make it to my next destination? Like, probably not. You might get a heart kelp pod from an enemy. So it didn't feel so punishing and terrifying to be out in the world. I think that's mostly my notes on why I liked it. It wasn't so hard. Like, even when it was difficult, I could take down a boss in like at most 8 tries, and like that's as hard as I want a game to be, personally.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. You kind of said a thing that is going to lead into my primary gripe with this game.
Okay.
So generally speaking, this game, at least as someone who's played many thousands of hours of other Souls games at this point, um, it's not. This game isn't like baby easy by any means, which
No.
is, I think, its biggest strength. Is that for somebody who's not used to this, I feel like this is an incredibly great spot to be like, do you want to learn the high level concept of, hey, don't rush in and just mash the attack button. There is a purpose and way that this combat will play out, and it's kind of like a dance. You got to learn how to do the dance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the problem that I have is that the baseline level of difficulty, I think, is still probably a bit too low. And we were talking about the leveling system earlier, and I agree that in the beginning it makes you feel good. The problem is that with the amount of tools that you get given by the end of the game, and then the fact that you can, without trying, because I know I did, without trying, I never farmed once for anything. I just killed stuff as I explored and everything. I hit the level cap, basically. I maxed
Yeah,
out my
so did I.
attack. Yeah, so like, and you are so strong when you are at the level cap, with or without any stowaways. Like your baseline of power and the amount of abilities you have access to, like, honestly, as a Souls player, it's a point where like I can't believe that I died at all towards the end of the game, like ever, because of how much stuff it gives you. It is incredible how many abilities and stuff Krill actually has. The How strong all the shells are, how good a bunch of the abilities are, how good the parries are. Did you ever use there's the backstep counter ability?
Um, yeah, where you press the neutral roll and you kind of like take a step back.
Yeah, and if you
Yeah.
time well, but if you can unlock an ability where if you time it to
Yeah.
count, and you get like a unique counter attack that does a bunch
Yep.
of damage and stagger, and like there was almost no reason to do anything other than that, and it was so powerful. It was so
See,
powerful.
I don't think I ever used it that generously. Like if I did use it, it was like on accident or only a couple times. I didn't quite master it that well,
I didn't
though.
even get the best spell in the game until after I had beaten the final boss, because I had heard that there was one of the adaptations that I had missed. So in addition to the shell abilities, are these things called adaptations that pull from the same like MP pool, or however it is you want to put it, your little pink icons on the screen above the blue shield shell bar there. Um, and you have access to those all the time, and you unlock more as the game goes on. The one that you get from one of the secret bosses basically makes a phantom tentacle thing that swings as you swing and attack, so it pretty much like doubles your damage output. And I already felt like unbelievably powerful, and I did every other thing in the game, maybe with minus a couple collectibles that I didn't get, and I never had that. And I'm like, I would have flattened the final boss in a way that would have made it not fun if I had that ability and used
Well,
it.
that's hilarious. First of all, because I got that ability and was just like never curious enough to use it, I guess,
It's
and didn't
by
even
far the
know.
strongest ability in the entire game. It's crazy.
Well, see, I'm interested in that because in the difficulty discussion in general, because I feel like what this game is going for, which I might argue is better than like what Elden Ring is going for, at least in some ways, is that is that the game is easy enough that if you want to complete it, you will be able to. There's that part. But also B, you are rewarded by exploring, and you are rewarded by exploring by like getting different abilities and making the combat easier, which I feel like is just good game design in general. But C, like it's easier to like make a game easy enough that like anyone can beat it and you can always add a challenge mode later than to make the game so hard that a lot of people are not going to be able to complete it. Where like this game is like you don't really have to explore and get special abilities or upgrade your heart kelp pods and whatever. If you kind of just want to run through and fight stuff, you can, and it'll be plenty hard. But like I think they're trying to reward your efforts by exploring by giving you good stuff,
See,
you know?
you're correct. So this is me assuming I am not aggro crab. You are absolutely right in that they're trying to reward the exploration element. The problem is they've done that to the detriment of the balance of the game. So the person who does that, and so this is just generally like a game theory thing as well. I can't remember what the name of the phenomenon is, but it's
Oh, that
also
people will always take the easiest strategy
yes.
that's given to
If
them.
you
Yeah.
if you offer it to them, they will use it, and you can be like, yeah, but you have all this other stuff over here. They go, I don't care. This one's good. Why would you ask me to
Oh,
use the other thing?
I think the fact that people like you exist is like the complete counter argument to that. There are plenty of people who do like no hit Elden Ring runs, and that game is as hard as could possibly be.
But no,
Like,
no, but that's the point. Is I am you're I kind of get what you're getting at, but the intention is you don't design it for me. I'm not asking to design the game to be like as hard as possible or any of that. It is when the general game design makes it pretty easy to do that without trying. Like I didn't go out of my way to go and get everything. Like I could have stopped finding new stuff and leveling up probably about 40% of the way into when I was doing it and been plenty strong enough to get to the end of the game without a whole lot of difficulty. Like easily, right?
well, see, this is where like I think you're a bit of an edge case because I basically 100%ed this game. I did just about everything. I mean, like I didn't purposefully 100% it, but by the end, I had pulled on every thread of exploration, everything I could seek out, did every single upgrade,
Mhm.
and I still felt like the final boss, I like could have easily gotten wrecked by. In fact, the only reason I didn't get wrecked by him is because I had those things that like revive you if you die in combat that you can equip. And I was just like, I'm gonna equip those, but I got killed by that dude like a ton of times, like, and
That
I
that
did
was
everything.
the only boss in the game that I think I ever did more than 2 attempts on. It's without a doubt the hardest fight in the game, in my opinion.
It is,
Yeah.
it is. But I mean, I think like again, like you maybe thought it was like easy, but I think most people are not gonna find it as easy as you, is what I'm saying
Yeah,
essentially.
I guess to me this is the my view on the design philosophy is very different than the one that you stated, because rather than you're right, it is much easier to make an easy game. It's in fact so easy to make an easy game that I could make one with no obstacles at all right now, and it wouldn't be fun at all.
Right.
Right, so my opinion is that because that's true, saying it's easier to make an easy game is the trivial solution, and that's not helpful or in any way, shape, or form. That's
No,
why
I don't think
for
it's trivial. I think it's better. I think it's better to err on the side. I think it's better to err on the side of like if you want to make the game easier for yourself by exploring and by upgrading, that option is available to you. That's what I'm saying.
yeah. So this is normally. I think it's funny that you're giving my exact argument for why there should be no difficulty options in Souls games, because the difficulty options are built into the game itself already, and for that exact reason. The problem that I have with this game is that it makes it you don't have to do very much to get to that point, and you can't go back once you do. There is no like in another Souls game, right? I could be like, oh, I'm level 150 whatever, and it's very easy because I can use whatever equipment and stuff I want. I can go and equip an unupgraded short sword if I want to, and go smack dudes with it to bring my challenge back if I think that's what's going to make it fun. I cannot do that in this game at all.
That's true.
I can only get stronger 100% of the time. And while I agree that generally speaking, because like I said, it is my argument for why games with exploration and blah 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 kind of are their own difficulty settings inherently
Hmm.
for difficult games because you can make it easier by getting better stuff. The problem is this game already isn't that hard, gives you way more stuff, and like you said before, there's a bunch of accessibility options that everybody has raved about because I think it's a good choice. The problem is it's doing all of those things simultaneously. And because of that, it makes it like I can't imagine having a hard time in the like act 3 of this game. Like you have to be so strong by the time you get there that it feels like it messes with like the balance of it. It's almost the opposite Elden Ring problem. Elden Ring gets like stupid hard right at the ends, scaling wise and enemy wise, in a way that almost doesn't make sense. And this game, you outpace the enemy so hardcore by the end of the game that it's like it's easier than in the beginning, and it takes
You
less
know,
effort.
again, I think this is where you're the exception. Like you say, it's really easy to get to that point, but like I still had a lot of difficulty towards the end of the game personally. Like I don't think it's as easy as you're characterizing it to be because you have a pretty high skill level with these types of
Oh,
games. I
that's
still,
admittedly, yeah. And this is
yeah,
I want to make clear again. I kind of said it before. This is my personal experience with the game,
I see. Yeah, I get you.
and how it is that I would tune it for me. And the only reason why I'm saying a little bit high level, where I think it's better because in attempting to make it so that I to make this game so that you and I can both have that experience that we're looking for, I think there's different ways to do this. And I genuinely think one of the things to do in this game is there should be no leveling system.
What?
There shouldn't be a leveling system literally at all. It should be purely based in the equipment and maybe you can upgrade your fork. Maybe. And
I
I
disagree,
think it
but
should stop there. Well, here's the thing. I'm not saying take the leveling system out and then don't rebalance anything about the game as it exists. I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah, I
it
get.
shouldn't have been designed with a leveling system in mind. That's what it
Oh, I get
feels
what you
like.
mean.
It's something to make it so that it flattens that progression curve for you just a little bit. And then after you've done that, if someone like you is like, I think this is too tough, that's what the accessibility menu's for. It allows me to have the experience that I'm looking to have and the experience that you're looking to have, which is the important part of accessibility because that's the other part that I think people don't put together. People, when they think accessibility, they think make game easier, make game easier to play for somebody who has literal physical disabilities. Accessibility is how do I get the most people to have a good experience with this thing? And it's a really hard thing to do. So I'm not
Yeah. Well,
saying I
and
have the solution, but I just think that you could take this game and tweak some things about it. And I think it would inherently be a better overall experience for more people. And again, that's all in my opinion. So,
I think you have a point there, and I think you're right about the accessibility thing. Erring on the side of players who have who have challenges playing the game, but like I think that's probably at least in this case because Souls games have classically not really included any accessibility options, and like I don't know. I push back a little bit on the idea that like there are things in the game to make it easier because there are, but I don't think those things are as fun as playing the game kind of quote unquote intended. And like beyond that, like I feel like all right, let's say Dark Soul 3, not like crab, just like regular. um
yeah.
they want to make it a game where like your adrenaline goes up and you sweat and you have to learn and the game has to be difficult. I think you could put a difficulty slider in there that just literally lower the enemy health bars, lower the amount of damage that the enemies do, increase the amount of damage you do by a certain percentage, and I could hand the controller to Stacy and she would have that exact adrenaline pumping, sweat down her back, like difficult experience that the designers want. just by making it easier, there are people who still are going to have just as hard a time. Whereas, like, by making it so hard and not having a traditional accessibility, they just have no way to play the game entirely. And I think that's why that conversation always airs on the side of like making it easier for less experienced people. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh, and not only that, because as you said before, it's much easier to make a thing easier rather than be harder and feel fair. Because it's also
Yeah.
easy to make something ridiculously hard. It'll also not be fun at all.
Right.
you know.
Right.
So I had
And it also depends on like who it's for. Like Dark Souls 3 is not meant for this is accessible to everybody. It's like for hardcore people, whereas this game is trying to reach for people like me or for people who just haven't played as many of these types of games. So I think just keeping in mind like it's also maybe fair that Dark Souls 3 is difficult. It's kind of meant to be difficult, you know?
it's meant to make you struggle and try and
Yeah,
try and try and try and try again. I don't now that I've played so much of these games, I understand a lot more why people talk about like these games aren't. When someone says these games aren't hard, and I don't really totally agree with that because they're definitely not easy. Um, they're more obtuse than they are difficult because it doesn't ever describe to you how to do something well, including
hmm
the combat mechanics. You just have to figure it out, and it is entirely like your experience with the game is predicated entirely on that relationship with how much do you like figuring that thing out. That's my opinion. And if you
yeah.
don't like figuring whatever part of the game is out, whether it's the lore or the actual like getting through an area with puzzles or the combat, because that's fundamentally what it's asking you to do. The moment you're like, I don't care, that's when you lose people. And so where I think what you're getting at with the like, oh, you could just like have like a slider for health and stuff to reduce it for somebody who wants an easier time. I agree with that concept fundamentally. I don't want to get into it with like its relationship to Souls games and their design philosophy, but I
Sure.
think that's a perfect concept like in the accessibility discussion for what I like and hear people refer to as like the flow state playing a game.
hmm
You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
So to describe it to the audience here, at least my perception of the flow state is when you are right at, it's not out of your reach abilities, but it's really, really, really high on the I'm about to like lose my ability to actually deal with whatever this thing is right now. And you're riding this very, very, very fine line of it's like somewhere between 80 and 90% of your ability. And it's just coasting between that point until there's a release when you have succeeded. And you feel great because you just put a whole bunch of mental effort into, I know how to do this fight. I just have to do it. Or I know how to do this, whatever it is. I don't know. You're doing a crazy race in some silly 90s kart racer or something like that against the CPU boss who cheats. And you're like, I'm only so good at this to play against a regular racer, but now there's this guy who's like a little bit better than me and he's like just out of reach. And
hmm
nailing that flow state is when you create a scenario where the player playing the thing is having not a super hard time with it, but enough of a hard time with it where they are convinced that they're gonna do it if they keep trying over and over again. That's kind of what it
Yes.
is to me, right? I'm sitting there and I'm just gonna do this one thing for like an hour, and it just feels good to do over and over again. And honestly, I'm not really thinking about how much time is passing right now. I'm just interested in completing this task.
Oh, that's so interesting. I feel like that is like my biggest downfall is like I hate in a Dark Souls game when I know that I can beat the boss because then I feel like I have to even if I'm not enjoying myself. I'm like, well, I have to do it again because I know that I can do it. And I'm like, I feel like I'm this much there, but I put myself through too much torture because I'm like, what I really should do is go explore or walk away or do anything else. But because I can do it, I don't get the flow state. I get like a compulsion that like well, I can do it, so I have to do it, and then I get really frustrated every time I die, and I kind of burn myself out.
Interesting. And you don't have that with another crab's treasure because that's just not how the fights play out to you.
Yeah, it doesn't take like when I do have like those bosses that did challenge me, like they did challenge me, but like the second or third time, I felt like I was getting substantially better, or the second or third time I did it, where as opposed to it took me 45 tries, and I'm like just getting angrier and angrier every attempt. It's just like when it's so far out of reach, I just get mad, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I guess I never really had that moment in this game, which is part of why I like. Because again, I like the combat and I like the number of abilities and everything you have. Because like to put it this way, if you took Krill's moveset and put it into basically any other game than Sekiro, because Sekiro already kind of has similar move types and everything, and he's a lot more capable than a Souls character. If you could, so you can jump in Elden Ring. Let's just go with Elden Ring because even the jumping is a huge thing. If you had a
Mhm.
grappling hook in Elden Ring, or if you could jump and then dodge in the air like you can in another Crab's Treasure, like I don't know how to convey to you in a few, like we could talk about it for probably another hour, like how that completely changes the entire game and how combat plays out now, like a hundred
Right. Yeah.
percent of the time, right? So because Krill is so capable, um, it makes it hard to hit that flow state because I've blown past the difficulty part of it for me. Like
Yeah, I get you.
I'm going to stomp whatever it is in front of me into the dirt because I have so much stuff available to me. And
Yeah.
I'm not sitting here like God gamer, blah blah blah. Like I'm not like that good. I just this game isn't that hard, and because it's not that hard, and it gives you so many tools, it's really just not that hard once you get familiar with it to be like, yeah, I'm just gonna steamroll this thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this game is built for people like me, and it's not built for people like you, you know?
Yeah, and at the same, so
That's
that's why
kind of
this
just it.
doesn't, to me, this isn't better than the other Souls games, but it is really good because I think very uniquely, as we've kind of been saying, um, its combat system, it's very clear where its influences are coming from, but it doesn't feel like it is just copying any of that. Its movement is much closer to that of a, it's funny. I keep making the SpongeBob reference in terms of like clearly it's like the silly underwater thing, but also even like Battle for Bikini Bottom as like a 3D platformer, like it controls movement wise closer to that than it does any other Souls game kind of thing, like in a good way,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the platforming in this game is pretty satisfying. And the grappling hook is really cool to use both in and out of combat for that reason. And also, the one thing I will say, for all the difficulty stuff we've been talking about, I am really glad that falling down a pit isn't an instant kill in this game. Because making it a
Ye
platformer and then having that happen from Souls, that would have been, honestly, that might have made some parts of this game, like, not that I think there's really difficult platforming challenges, but even just the, oh, I randomly fell off the edge of this, ha ha ha. Like, the
Yeah.
number of times that would happen would be like horrifying, and it would have been a genuine major detriment to this game.
Yeah, I'm also glad I turned off the taking damage from falling in pits because like I that was enough. I feel like that's really the only misstep I could point to in this game for me, like very pointedly is like they put too many enemies like in platforming sections, and it's like you shouldn't have to be worrying about pits when you're trying to just like dodge an enemy, or like the edge is a little bit closer than you thought, and or like something is a little bit slipperier and jankier than you thought, and now you're taking damage from the environment and not the enemy. So I just turned that right off because I was like, I'm not going to be worrying about. Plus, this game is a little glitchy, so it is easy to fall through something or around something that you did not expect.
That's really the bigger thing, is that yes, this game is a little bit glitchy. Like, yes, I have absolutely clipped through the map in
Yes, me
weird
too.
spots a couple of times. When it comes to, like, I agree with you a little bit on enemies being near edges, like on some level there is an amount of this is deliberate encounter design, and the environment is like an established, we wanted you to deal with this in this situation. But at the same time, like, I get it, because that's it's rarely a fun feeling moment of like, oh, I don't have a whole lot of room, I'm gonna fall off the edge, and it's like that's not fun almost in like any game, honestly, ever.
Yeah, and I feel like they just weren't that deliberate. Like there are some encounters I can think of where like yes, that made sense because you had a bit of an open space or the number of enemies, but there are some where it's just like no, I think they kind of messed up. They put 3 enemies in this really small thing where like they really just shouldn't have. Like I don't think they were as deliberate as you would hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can't really think of any specific moments for me. And I also didn't really mind just taking a chunk of damage for falling, like, as like there's still being some punish to it rather than just wasting a little bit of my time. I was fine with that. But yeah, no, the thing that they definitely needed to not do was make it so that you died when you fell down a bottomless pit like you do in a Souls, because that would have been like, yeah,
Absolutely.
that would have made this game like, this game would be good if, yeah, it would be one of those
Yeah.
just like fatal flaw kind of things. Like, oh gosh, I don't really understand why they did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do
Can
we?
we talk about how the story ends?
Here's the thing. I was literally just gonna ask him, like, I don't know how much more we want to talk about mechanics, and I didn't know if we wanted to talk about the ending, because I was looking at the screen thinking the exact same thing, because I love the ending of this game so much.
Dude,
Oh,
me
oh
too.
my God, the ending of this game is absolutely incredible. It's so
Yeah.
good. I
So
did a lot of complaining
obviously,
about the balance and everything towards the end, but in terms of what actually happens at the end is so incredible. So I
yeah,
guess
so
spoilers, if
obviously,
you don't want to know what happens at the end and you want to experience it for yourself, I wouldn't blame you if you tuned out right now. So
yeah. All right, so like I mean my biggest the thing I loved was like just the very very end. Do you like is there anything leading up you wanted to talk about or just like
so to me, so
the end?
I was initially thinking the ending, but the entire end sequence, like as a whole, I
Mhm.
think is super 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 incredible. So after the let's just go right to what I think the actual final boss is, not even the lead up to that, because there's the weird umami nonsense that kind of gets us
Yeah,
there.
which I think that was their way of like because you kind of knew that Blue Crab guy was going to turn into the final boss, right? Like we knew he was going to be the bad guy, or at least I did.
Absolutely. I mean, he's, yeah, because the actual capitalist man Roland has died at this point, and he's been gone for like half the game at this point. So like, who's going to take up this mantle, because it's clearly still what this world is about? The guy who worshipped him, who
Yep.
just randomly
So I
shows up right at the end and takes the god power thing that you had spent like the whole last act of the game putting together to try and save the old ocean and the current ocean, and he just goes, oh cool, look at this, wow, I feel pretty strong, and then he turns into like a god snail thing.
But I think the umami nonsense was their way. Like when that happened, I was like, oh, I guess maybe Blue Crab guy isn't the final boss. I think that was their way to kind of like swerve you so that there was some kind of twist.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's the only reason they did
Well,
it.
yeah, and they also had the umami creature voice thing taunting you throughout like pretty much like the second half of the game, pretty much,
Yeah.
and
Right.
kind of setting up that whole encounter, and then it happens and it's good, but then yes, the I was like, well, that can't be it, and of course it wasn't. So yeah, so you fight Elon Musk's little butt boy worship fan man in hermit crab form, and he has stolen the perfect
The power
whirl.
to be God,
Yeah, yeah,
basically.
the perfect whirl, as they call it, as in WHORL, which I believe is both a Berserk reference, and then also when they call him Firth the crab who stole the whirl, is a
Mm,
very funny the man who sold the world's pun reference for his name,
yep.
which I liked that a lot. Um, so you fight him, and then you knock the shell off of him, and Krill at this point, like whatever his name, I think Firth, is that his name? Firth, blue crab guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
he's like, hey, don't put that on. And then Krill puts it on and basically has the like, okay, so I've had enough of everything in this entire game. I'm sick of all you people who don't care about each other. I'm sick of all the plastic and you just care about the trash and blah blah blah. I am going to rider punch you through the trash islands that you made with your god powers and and rain trash, which is effectively money, down upon New Carcinia, the city where everybody is at the end. And then the shell breaks, so there's no more god power thing anymore. And then you hit the town, and he goes, I don't have the god power that I was going to use to save everybody anymore. Was this whole thing for nothing? I don't really know. And you get your last little victory lap walking around town talking to people, which includes you walking. Firth has actually survived the encounter, and then he goes, oh, hey, what are you doing here? And then a boot falls on him and smushes him and he dies. It's great. I love it. It's so good. He's just in the middle of a sentence. You know what? They did my favorite trick where, you know how subtitles always spoil when somebody's about to get cut off?
Yeah.
They don't do that. And they just have
Yeah,
his
yeah.
entire sentence, and then the boot just falls on him. It's really good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And then you talk to, I can't remember what the mom lady is, and she has like a really like very personal conversation of just like, yeah, well, we got all this trash here, but like we just gotta, keep on keeping on, and hey, what are you gonna do next? And Krill's like, um, I don't know, actually. I guess I'm gonna go get
Yeah.
my shell, even though I don't think I actually got the treasure, because we got the treasure. They got the so they get the treasure off the back of the cereal box, and then they open it up and they're like, I can't believe it. It's worthless, and it's filled with human money. It's so
It's like millions of
yeah,
dollars.
it's like an untold treasures like for people, and they're like, I can't believe it. There's nothing in here. This is worthless.
He calls it a bunch of soggy paper.
Yeah, it's really funny. It's so funny.
Oh man.
But yeah, he's like, all right, well, I'm gonna go talk to Pronathan over there, and you can talk to a couple other characters on the way out if you want. But the big ones with the mom lady, where she just kind of is just like, yeah, so like, what are you gonna do now? Like, I don't
And the
know.
homeless guy too. Did you talk to the homeless crab?
Yes, and he's talking about just like, yeah, one day we'll, even though it's not here right now, we'll just think of what home is in the future, and it's like one of those like, oh man, the poor guy. And then you walk up to Pronathan, and the guy who was pretending to be the loan shark, and he's wearing your house shell on his head, and you're like, all right,
Which he was the whole
yeah,
game
the
too.
entire game taunting you with it, and
Yeah.
and you're like, all right, I did every, like, I got multiple treasures and stuff actually, and then he goes, what? I don't care about your treasure or any of that, because look at how much trash is everywhere in the house, or in the town. I'm richer than I've ever been. I'm gonna do blah blah blah. And he goes, I'm not giving you your house back. And then instead of talking to him, you do, I can't say the things that I want to say
You
here.
do the thing that you should have done from the very beginning, which is
Oh,
you
Andy
stab
said
him in
it.
the face.
Yes, because what shows
He's-
up on screen is the prompt for the R1 at that point, and then it says R1 attack, and you just hit him, and he flies away and dies like any other random enemy, and you pick up your house, and the game is over, and you get your home back. And so at the beginning of the stream, there's a opening little thing where it's got like a faux documentary of like, what word do you think of when you think of the Earth? And it redoes the same thing, but it changes the speech. Instead of it being kind of matter of fact about how life is in the ocean, it becomes about the hopefulness of the different types of people who are helpers in the world, and it shows examples of the characters that you encountered in the game doing their version of what it is that they do to give back to the people around them. And then it basically shows Krill just he's like waving to go out of town, but he's not wearing his house, and because it's just like, yeah, and some people they move around and they do different things, kind of stuff. So it's like Krill's going somewhere, doesn't really say where. And then the last thing that it shows is that he gave his house to the homeless guy,
Yeah.
and it kind of made me cry a little because I was like, oh, no, he did learn what he
Yeah.
needed to learn from this whole experience. He became a whole hermit crab man. I almost
Yeah.
said
I
human,
think
but He's not.
I think yeah, it's the ending is incredibly touching. Like it's I don't know, it really moved me too and like I think like I don't even think I'm really reading into it that deep when I say like I think Krill's story is like just the about like the loss of innocence that we all experience as people growing up.
Yes.
Um it's almost like just literally an allegory for like what it's like to go from being a kid to like being a teenager or an adult who like experiences suffering and like his first reaction is just like, well, I've been in this home, this place. All I want to do is stay in the safety of my literal shell, which is my home, and not talk to anybody. And like you have a pretty heartfelt moment in the middle with her name's not Rita, but I just want to call her Rita, I guess. Who like owns the and this is like after you've already gone through a ton of stuff and he's like, this is such bullcrap. Like, I got removed. Like, I don't want to be here in this like dinky ocean, like where people are suffering. Like, the ocean sucks. And she's like, you know what? I think maybe it's good that you got some perspective and came down to the ocean with the rest of us because we've been suffering here for a long time. So like, maybe you should check your privilege and like
Yep.
which is like a pretty like harsh moment for this game to throw at the main character. Like I was pretty shocked, you know?
Well, because I think as you said, it's very much it's very naked in what it is that it's trying to say about everything. Like it's
Yeah.
very clear. It's just
Yeah.
like, hey, you see all this trash? It's bad. Hey, you see this guy who's abusing the trash that's also money in this world because we decided to smash our environmentalism and anti-capitalism messages into like one monolithic thing. Uh, yeah, that's bad, and the people who perpetuate it are bad. And guess what? You should probably do something about it because if nobody does anything about it, we simply all suffer and it gets worse. And it's not going to get better unless you do something about it. And it's
Yeah.
very it's not saying anything profoundly new. It's simply stating it in a very matter of fact and I think uh
Effective way.
yeah, I was gonna say I'm trying to think of like a really good word for it, but yes, it's very it hits the mark. It knows exactly what
Yeah.
it's going for, and it's very believable, and it doesn't come off as patronizing or anything. It's one of those, hey, the world does kind of suck actually in a lot of ways, and that's just a fact, and that's fine. But we all have to live in the world and deal with that fact that just doesn't go
Yeah.
away because we decide that it's not the case anymore and doing the whole he's a literal hermit crab hiding in a shell thing like it's a touch on the nose obviously but like it works it works really well.
Yeah, yeah, and I love the like the emphasis on like it's just like I forget exactly what they say, but they say like there's a lot of people doing thankless kind deeds for other people like just cuz it's the right thing to do and like I don't know, it's just it's powerful to see like who is like this character that is like effectively a kid that doesn't know about all the bad stuff that's happening to like kind of being like a little bit selfish and self-absorbed to the end going like it's a little bit more important to try and take care of the other people or do like anything small that I can do. Like I don't know, I really like resonated with it and I feel like it's a story that like everybody can resonate with because we all remember like being innocent kids and like going through like the pain that is just like growing up and becoming a person, you know?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in that for a game that on its surface was like, we go, oh, it's like Souls, but it's like bright and colorful and blah blah blah. So it's probably not. It's really not a bright and colorful story in any way, shape, or form. This is an
No.
incredibly human story, despite the fact that it's about a bunch of sea creatures. It's just a really good theming that they've done for everything of like a really relatable, especially in current times, kind of story right now. People
Yeah.
feel a lot of these things very strongly, and Aggro Crab, I think, did an excellent job of making a piece of art that's not just a fun game to play, but also rather poignant and meaningful set of messaging around why it's important to do the right thing just because. Not because you get something from it, but just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of it being kind of dark, like they literally say at the end, Krill says at the end, like everything is worse than it was when it started. Like literally nothing good happens in this story. It is not a traditional hero's journey, like at all.
Yeah,
It's
he
like, I mean,
literally is like, yeah, I dropped trash all over the town. And even though people are happy about it because it's technically money, he's made it clear at this point that he realizes the trash stuff is all nonsense. So he's just like,
yeah,
yeah, so I'm here. I don't have my shell. The town's covered in trash. Uh,
everything's worse. Everything's terrible.
which also I think is a funny kind of play at the way that Souls games and stuff end, because you can argue that the games end and you're like, I don't think anything good happened.
That's, you
I
know,
think it's over, but I don't think it was good.
that's a good point, actually. I think you're
I
right,
think it was a little
especially.
deliberate.
Well, that's funny. Like by that point, I had so forgotten that this game was trying to like comment on Souls games. I felt like so much like it was just like doing its own thing in terms of the character growth. But you are certainly right that it still shares some stuff in common.
It's funny because the kind of beats that it does for Souls things, like obviously, like I dropped it earlier and I didn't even like mention the reference, but the open world area you hit in the middle of the game after like the first what I'll just call like the first actual section of the game, where you go through like a dungeon area and fight a boss and everything. It's called the
Yeah,
Sands Between, which is the lands between from Elden Ring,
which
but
is so delightful.
yeah, so like there's a whole bunch of like very deliberate, like the name of this thing is like the so before you get to the old ocean, there's like whatever the bleached king, that's what he is. So I was walking up that big staircase and I saw the giant crab like thing in the background before you actually go into. I was like, this is gonna be called the something king as a fight. I just don't know what the part of the title is gonna be yet. And then it showed up the Bleach King. I went, okay, there it is. That's the one.
Yep, yep.
like the number of different times where it's just like, oh, I know what this is. I know
Yep.
exactly what they're trying to do right here. It's cute. It's fun. They wear their influences on their sleeve in a good way. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have, despite the fact that I have some criticisms of this game, I really can't say enough good about it for being what it is, coming from a team that I don't know what the size of it is, but I think is relatively small. And releasing this for $30, um, in the middle of a time when there's just so many good games that have come out in the last like 12 months,
Yeah.
to be kind of even in the discussion at this point, there's something to be said about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think even if it's not for you specifically, like it is absolutely nailing the thing that they're trying to go for, you know?
Here's the thing, full on. I love this game. I would,
Oh, it's amazing.
I would tweak some things about the balance to my own taste. Oh, we didn't even talk about the best accessibility option.
Which
You
one?
could just give him a gun.
Oh, yeah, I never tried it. Did you try
No,
it?
see, you know what I realized? So I've never done it. Yeah, so the accessibility option, if you go into the pause menu, it's got a whole bunch of things where, like Andy said, you can turn off the, like, oh, don't take any damage when you fall. Don't drop your microplastics when you die, that kind of stuff. Basically, turn off the corpse run function, blah, blah, blah. And then at the bottom is a checkbox that says verbatim, give Krill a gun. And if you check that, it gives you a shell that is just a 45 caliber pistol. And if you hit the ability button, it's a one-shot kill and you literally fire a bullet at whatever you're targeting. The only reason why I was thinking about the gun part today is because I got an achievement for finally getting the last adaptation. That's why I booted up earlier, because I was like, oh, one, I want to go and see how it feels in my hand to talk about it before the podcast. And I'm going to go grab that last adaptation I didn't get. So I got the achievement for getting all the adaptations. And then I was like, I wonder what ones I'm missing. And one of the achievements is shoot another crab with a gun.
Hilarious.
So they
Hilarious.
want you to get an achievement or a trophy or whatever for this game. Go into the
Wow.
accessibility options, get the gun, and then shoot a man with it. Because you know,
Hilarious.
it, my one of my favorite jokes of all time is You know what would have solved this entire plot line is if the main character had a gun, and another Crab's Treasure answers that question. What would happen if Krill had a gun? The answer is he'd win. He will
There is a
succeed.
video on YouTube I'm watching right now. It's called Another Crab's Treasure, but the footage is 5 times speed and Krill got a gun full game. It's 24 minutes long and it is exactly what is on the tin, baby.
Oh man, that's so funny. But
Oh my god.
yeah. What was I can't remember what I was saying before I got distracted by how funny the gun was.
I don't know. This game's great. You should love it.
Yeah, I highly recommend checking this game out. Whether you're into Souls games, whether you're not into Souls games and have been curious about them, if you just want a good action RPG with a fun art style and has thoughts on why you should save the environment and why capitalism is bad, if any or all of that sounds up your alley, this is the game for you.
Give him a gun, you call it Krill of Duty, baby. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, except he'd be even more powerful because he has a lock on and it's one shot, baby. It'd be it. It'd be it.
Another
It'd be
Crab's Treasure
Krill of Duty Warzone. He wins every game.
feeding Pagaris to the worm. Is there like a worm? What?
To the
Oh my
worm?
god, you can feed Pagaris to the worm.
To the worm. What worm?
The worms that like shoot out of the ground like desert style.
I was thinking something bigger. Yeah, okay. What's the speed run tech to beating Pagaris is to walk him to the edge of the map and then jump off the edge of the map, and most of the time he follows you down except you come back and he doesn't.
Hilarious.
Very funny. Yeah,
That's
spoilers.
really
Yeah, if you're having trouble with Pagaris, just walk his crab butt right off the edge of the map. That'll do it.
Yeah. Well, look, everybody. This has been Cryptic Puzzle. This has been probably our longest episode so far. But if you're enjoying it, thanks for listening to us while we gush about this great game. Next time, we're going to talk about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Yeah, either that or I was going to say maybe we do one of those topic episodes. But yeah, we already played the game. We should do that before I.
Oh yeah, and maybe look forward to topics. We might be doing some broader topics too. But
yeah, we had mentioned a couple things where I was like, Andy, I would talk to you for an hour, but we already said we were going to talk for an hour about another Crab's Treasure, so I can't do that. Or we could do a
Tommy?
double episode and talk for 2 more hours right now and talk about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Tommy, thank you for your service to me.
Also, 0% chance I was going to do that. If you were like, "Oh, dude, we should," I was like, "No." I'm gonna.
way,
I was
no.
like, I'm gonna end the stream right now if you say yes.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm signing off. It's my bedtime.
Yeah, it's getting pretty close to my bedtime too. We're old. We're not actually old. We just feel old because everybody who's a millennial feels old because of the state of the world. You know.
We just feel old.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Capitalism, anti-capitalism, anti-crabitalism.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.